Hello. I think we're got a pretty good crowd that's participating today, and we're going to give a minute or two just to make sure everyone's logging in and able to see the screen. You should be seeing the title for today's talk and a few images of our speakers, and we'll pause for just a few seconds just to let things settle. While we're doing that, we'll have the people on the screen at the top, if you can see the video. There's 4 of us on screen. The 2 people we care about, you all care about, are Barry and Christian. Barry, raise your hand, say hello. Thank you. And Christian as well, thank you. Anna Ardon and myself are Gensler folks based in Costa Rica. Anna's a firm-wide leader of hospitality for Gensler. I'm the regional leader and had her job for several years in the past as well. We work together. And Anna's going to introduce in more detail Barry and Christian. We're very lucky today. Our 4 offices in LATAM, we have a lot of clients, a lot of exposure to the tourism market and the hospitality market, but we're not the experts like the 2 people who are going to be introducing some ideas today. Big topics that we want to try and hit, and we've been talking about with them already. I'm not going to read all those words on the screen, but for sure we were going to talk about what we love about our destinations. Is now the time to rethink some of those things, and then what are some of the short and long-term strategies that we can get there, and medium and long-term, and ultimately what is the future about. So we're all in uncharted territory. I think that's an easy thing to say these days. But there's a lot of speculation about how to restart tourism, restart a lot of industries around the world. Tourism is tied to so many other things: travel, airline travel, work. But we've got 2 good navigators that we want to spend you to hear some more from and have to spend some time with. So thank you to Barry and Christian for being available for this. Next slide is going to just quickly allow you to understand the people on the call. If you can go to the next. Next slide, please. Thank you. There's 2 ways for you to participate. 2 ways for you to participate in the background. We got people in the background who will be watching the chat window on the left. So the go-to interactive screen that you should have with your registration and what you're looking at will allow you to send some chat questions. We'll be looking at those. The other one is to raise your hand. There's another opportunity to ask a live question. So in between, when Barry finishes his presentation and Christian picks up, we'll take a few minutes to hear a question or 2. If we have the time, we'll take 2, and then respond to those. At the end, we'll save some time as well for some chat questions. And without further ado, a quick introduction from Anna to the gentleman.
So Thank you, Barry and Christian, for joining us today. It really is an honor to have you both on this platform and for you to share all your knowledge with all of us. So Barry has more than 45 years of successful experience in the tourism sector. He's one of the pioneers of the development of sustainable tourism worldwide and currently the herald of regenerative tourism. Sorry about that. Barry was actually responsible for the marketing director of the Costa Rica Tourism Institute for 10 consecutive years. He definitely has a lot of knowledge in the tourism, and what I love about it is that he's always willing to share all his knowledge with all of us. So he's an open book. If you ever get a chance to meet him, please do so. He's a great person. So is Christian. Christian is actually the president of Prime, a real estate private equity firm with an active role in identifying and structuring real estate investment opportunities in Latin America. He also has an extensive knowledge of the hospitality market in LATAM. We have been reaching out to him in the last couple of weeks to see where all of this is going, and he certainly has, great knowledge in all of this. And again, it's such an honor to have both of you to share this space with us today. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Next slide.
Okay, good morning to all of you. It's a real honor and a pleasure to be here and share with all you people, and to be able to do it in a time when there's so much convulsion and so much unexpected and not being able to predict what's going to happen in the near future. is really a very interesting challenge. So today we're going to look at some basic prospects, some basic conditions, some basic principles that have affected the development of the tourism in Costa Rica, but only as a model to be able to look at it from the whole Latin American region, because I know that there's many people from different countries, from most of the countries of Latin America, are here with us. And so I'm going to talk about Costa Rica, but I'm really trying to use it as an example of what is happening in the world and how it's going about and what's going to be the future as far as we can tell. And a lot of people have a particular image of Costa Rica because we have become, fortunately, leaders in the world in terms of sustainable tourism and nature-oriented tourism for many years now. And so most of you probably have thought that we had a specific strategy and different things that we put into effect, different plans, goals, et cetera, that we put into effect to come to this point. And there is a certain amount of truth to that, but there's more to a natural, I believe, organic growth to tourism in Costa Rica than anything else. And I think it's consistent with the way nature is, which is very organic. In 1972, in Costa Rica, we only had traditional conventional tourism, and we only had about 100,000 tourists coming to our country per year. And it was in 1972 when the national parks were founded. This made a big change because it started bringing into the country specific interest groups of National Geographic, the Audubon Society, and other groups of that nature. And they're the first ones that started coming to our country to explore our nature and to see a different kind of situation, excuse me, than what we've had in the past. And so it was sort of like by chance that we moved into ecotourism, which we officially started in 1976, but it did not become popular till the latter years of the 80s, when some of the Canadians and then the British and some of the Germans and finally the North Americans came into play with us. But in 1972, we created that concept, which became very much oriented towards nature. And we worked, ecotourism was purely, basically, it said always from the beginning that social part was included, but it really wasn't in the practice. So in 1994, when Jose Maria Figueres became president of the country, and by the way, some of you may not recognize his name, but you probably recognize Cristiana Figueres, his sister, who is the one who organized the Paris Accord of climate change just recently. And he had us all come in and start working on sustainable concepts. So we started changing our whole focus to include the social structure, the social development, much more so than we had in the past. And this is one of the things that has been one of the founding parts of the experience of Costa Rica. And we started at that time, we created the certification for sustainable tourism, which is the CST, and it's been recognized as one of the best in the world. And we also started our first destination branding, which was no artificial ingredients. And we used that for many, many years, and it's a very good positioning tool for us. And as a matter of fact, the Harvard Business School declared that that was probably the first country brand destination. And this is an interesting concept because now we all know that we all have to have it. The importance of brands is obviously something that we can't underscore enough. So we started developing those concepts, and it became very clear to us that we had some very interesting advantages because of our cultural idiosyncrasies. Our people we don't have an army, our people are very well educated, our people are friendly and they smile. So we have what most people know as the Pura Vida concept. You know, the idea of being able to have a smile every time you talk with somebody and having a very welcome attitude. And this started impacting the experience of the tourism sector very, very much. The clients came out very, very satisfied and went back transformed. In fact, we were trying to transform the tourist instead of letting them recycle us. We wanted to recycle the tourist. But in this process, we also developed the concept that we had to be able to help the communities that were being developed. And that's where we started promoting the fact that we were impacting the local communities and doing a lot of things. And we did a lot of that. We did achieve a lot of that, but we really have, into a certain degree, over preached what we really do. And this is something that we've had to really look at, because doing this whole transition, we had a huge transition through the technological changes that have affected our industry. Obviously, the technological changes have impacted every way that we do business, all the things that we do operationally inside our companies. But the biggest change that the technological advance has had is on our clients, because now they are much more informed, they are much more demanding, and they are much more concentrated on experience living instead of simply because they come to a hotel or something of that nature. So we have to be able to produce something that's very keen. But the fact of the matter is, we did work very closely together, the private sector with the public sector, and we focused in the same direction all the time. We were always together in where we were going, but we really didn't have a specific objective or a specific goal that we were going to achieve. If you had asked me when I invented the term in '76 of ecotourism that it was going to become as popular and as well known worldwide, I'd say you're crazy. Well, in the same way we thought in Costa Rica sustainable tourism was going to be such an important factor in the world, we would have probably thought, no, that's being too optimistic. But yet it's been there. Now, why is it? That's the important thing to notice. Why is it that way? It's because our clients are looking for it. People are wanting more and more to have the spiritual contact with nature, the spiritual contact with cultures, and be able to experience a life-transforming event, a life-transforming activity that can make them enjoy and culturize themselves even more towards the future. So this is what we started looking at, and before we started this whole problem with the coronavirus, we were already looking at the fact that we really needed to improve a lot of areas, because we had made a big impact, but we were not really being as fully consistent with what we were preaching as we should. For example, we were not really taking into account the development and the aspirations of the communities, the local communities. We were more like giving them the breadcrumbs off our table than really involving them and making them an actor and part of our developments. And this is something that has preoccupied me particularly for a long time. And so this coronavirus has been obviously a huge disruption to everything we're doing, and it's going to have a tremendous impact, particularly the economic impact, of which Cristian will talk a little bit more after I finish, has been very, very important, and it's going to change everything we do towards the future. But it also opens up an opportunity that is very particular, because the whole world is becoming a lot more socially interdependent and much more conscious of its relationship with nature. We're seeing things we had never seen before. I think we've achieved dropping a degree in the global temperature in these past 3 months that we've had very little activity in the world. And these changes are just amazing, but from a nature perspective. But we're also having changes from the social perspective. We're valuing a lot more our interpersonal relationships and our social structures. We miss going out to the pubs. We miss going out to restaurants. We miss having activities with other people. And so that gives us an opportunity to use this time to restructure, to refocus, to reinvent ourselves, and start developing a much more integrated concept of what we can do in terms of tourism and the experience. You can move to the next slide if you would be kind enough, please. Just to give you an idea of some of the things, it's very important that we look at how we're making decisions and how now we can finally get the decision makers, particularly on the political side, and the big businessmen to look at things from a different perspective and to realize that what really is important is the experience of the people that come and visit us, their clients, and that experience starts, derives, and comes from the living organism that the communities where they have these projects are. And this is something that people haven't really taken too much into account. It's very curious because the majority of project developers and of financing groups, etc., are their main concern is making money, and that's fine. I have no qualms with that. But what they have done because of that, they have thought that they can economize by not looking into these other aspects more thoroughly and incorporating them into their way of living or doing business. And that's actually turning out to be more expensive to them. Let's look at the case of the examples of some of the big hotels in some of the beaches in Mexico and in Dominican Republic, that because the algae was improperly managed, has become a tremendous harassment, and it's become so stinky, so smelly to be there that they've had to close big brand new hotels because the smell is too strong for the people. And there's so many other things that are happening. How cities are starting to fight against the big conglomerations of tourists and things like that. So in all of Latin America, we have a tremendous opportunity to start incorporating these concepts, which will make the development a lot cheaper. Why do I say it's cheaper? Because if you do a study, a diagnosis of where you're going to put a project beforehand, and you see what the real experiences are, what alternatives you have, what aspects you can deal with, and what you can incorporate for your client, it will give you a very clear definition of what the profile of your ideal client is. So you just don't build something that it occurred to you because it's a very pretty property and then go out and look for clients. You first find out which are the clients that are going to be most interested in coming and visiting your particular project. That way you have two big advantages. One, you design only what you need for that, and you design it within the context, which actually makes the design much more friendlier to the user, to the client, but also it makes it so much cheaper to market because you have, first of all, you know who your profiles are, your clients are, where their market segments are, how to get to them. And so marketing them is a lot cheaper, but also you're getting into a group of people that will recommend you to other people in the same group. So you get a lot of organic marketing involved as well. And this is what regeneration is. We need to come up with new ideas. We need to come up with ways of changing, not from improving things, not from coming to fixing things so that we're back the way it used to be, but actually coming up with new ideas and with regenerating things so that we are better. We have a lot more people traveling as tourists. We have a lot more just inhabitants in our different locations, and we have to be able to assimilate that properly and incorporate them for the tourism projects that we have. So this is the kind of change that we need to have in order to be able to have the proper impact and be able to succeed in assuming what the new changes are coming. So even though we have a lot of problems, we have a lot of uncertainty coming into us right now, the fact that we didn't have a strategy before and nature helped and guided us and led us through this whole process to position Costa Rica to where it is, and to position the concepts, because the same concepts of sustainable tourism are being developed throughout all the world, and very much so throughout all of Latin America. This happened organically. So I believe that this change is shaking our limbs very strongly, but it is also setting the stage to guide us into what the new future has to be. So we shouldn't look at it all as negative. We need to look at it as a very good opportunity and the chance to really do things a lot better. Now, the problem is the economic damage has been done. So I'm going to, I don't know if there are any specific questions right now or not, but I would like to then get over to Cristian so he can present the status quo in terms of the economic structure and some of the other concepts, and then we can move into more questions and answers at the end and a few other things. This is just a basic outline of what regenerative tourism is, how it incorporates all the cultural things and the ecosystems as well into one solid and integrated aspect so that tourism is properly impacted. So unless we have some questions, Cristian, maybe you want to take over and explain some of the other data.
Just quickly, and thank you so much, Barry. I'll throw out one big idea. Your perception about how luxury is going to change, what that's going to do for price points in the near future and even the long term. We're all speculating, a lot of people are, airline travel is going to be expensive. Reopening hotels is going to take some effort. I think Christian will touch on that. But aiming high, trips are going to be even more special. Maybe people are traveling less, so they will expect more. I'd like to your a few more comments about experience and degree of luxury.
Okay, that's a very important point, Tom, because in effect, travel is going to be more expensive, even though local rates are going to go down, because we're going to be competing with a lot more demand available to a lot more offer available to a lot less demand, particularly in the initial year after this basic coronavirus crisis gets over us. We're going to have lower rates, but we're going to have a lot higher air travel rates. Right now, just a couple of days ago, they passed a norm that all the middle seats of all the airlines are going to have to be taken out just to start off with. And then you're going to have so many other things you don't necessarily have. We're going into a world recession. So the truth of the matter is our markets are going to be in recession. And because they're in recession, they're not going to have the available disposable income to be able to spend on vacations that they were planning on doing before. They're going to have to use it just to survive, to maintain or to rebuild their businesses or to whatever they need to do in that sense. And so in effect, the people who are going to be able to travel at the initial stages are going to be the middle upper class people are going to have much more facilities in their areas of movement than the lower income people. So that's one of the things that's going to make it. And these people are also very, very well educated usually, and so they're a lot more demanding on the quality and things like that. But interestingly, they also present a very interesting opportunity, because you look at somebody like Bill and Melinda Gates and how much they like nature, and you look at some of all these huge millionaires and people and the way they like to meet with people and get down to the gritty and deal with human development and all these kinds of stuff. So it's not like they're not interested in it. Doesn't mean we just have to do it right, and we have to guarantee that we have the proper protocols for cleanliness and for doing it. That's the new normal from now on. Everything for the next couple years in tourism, you better be used to doing all the health, the public health cleaning type protocols, because they're going to be in demand. So in that sense, you have an opportunity, because you're going to get people who are going to demand quality, but not necessarily luxury. And so you can do things right within what you have, and just be able to capture these people who would normally just come for luxury, and they won't necessarily come for the luxury, but they will come for quality, and they will require that you do it at a high level and a very proficient level as well. Does that answer your question?
Well, it answers the question, and there's a lot of room for the ways to interpret what luxury is going to become. But I don't want to say more than what you've already put, the perspective you put on it. And a good segue to Christian. Other questions will be coming maybe in the background. We'll look forward to seeing what they are. Christian, take it away. For you. And the next, thank you. Next
Perfect.
slide.
Thank you, Tom. I think everything that Barry just said is very interesting. We're also seeing a lot of that, and I'd sum it up that at the end of the day, luxury is a lot more aligned now with the experience rather than the product, and in that sense. So the complication or the challenge there is to actually take and design an experience through the real estate and through the programming. And I think that's my key takeaway from what Barry was saying, that I think is very, very important. And that's where Costa Rica in particular has an existing experience that we just need to learn how to harness. And I think it's going to be at the top of the list in terms of what people are looking for. And therefore, also that's going to push the pricing up for the luxury segment. The more you can give these wellness-oriented, life-improving journeys, the higher you're going to be able to charge. But diving into our presentation, just very briefly, please pass on to the next slide. Prime is a company that is based in San Jose. We have presence in Latin America, in Guatemala, and partially in Colombia. And we've been focused on trying to develop good stewardship structures and patterns for our clients and investors basically trying to do a little bit of what Barry was also mentioning in terms of helping them have visibility as to the best practices, understanding the ecosystem where these hospitality or real estate investments are being placed, how to interact within that ecosystem, but also how to tie them in globally. And the experience, like we just heard, is very, very important. The interaction is very, very important, but also there has to be a congruency with the structure from a real estate perspective and a financial perspective. If we create a perfect experience, but the economics don't work, if we create a great experience, but the hospitality component of it, the room and board, for example, are not appropriate or in unison to the rest of the experience, that also doesn't work. So a lot of what we have been doing in the region for the last 13 years has been associated to that. And we've been honored to collaborate with Gensler for various years now in different projects. And that's a little bit of what we do. About 40% of our business is hospitality. And we keep a lot of, we keep track of what's going on, and we've gathered a lot of information that we're glad we can share with you and the audience. And in that sense, I also, and first most, I should have begun here. I want to thank you and Anna and the rest of the Gensler team for the invitation to join you in this very interesting conversation. So please pass to the next slide. Thank you. So this is going to be in Spanish. I apologize. I thought the presentation was going to be in Spanish, so it's going to be with immediate translation, which would be good for everybody in the audience. So just very quickly, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen different interpretations of this. I'm going to go through a lot of information that has been shared by global companies with a lot of insight that have much better insight than we do. And then from there, I'm going to try and zoom in to our hospitality industry, and in particular to Costa Rica, which brings us to this conversation. So the first slide to the left is from Goldman Sachs, and basically it was published about 3 weeks ago in a paper they wrote about Latin America, where they were saying that Latin America is about to hit the wall, and we're going into our deepest economic contraction in the post-war period. If you see at the bottom right of that graph, you'll see already where the coronavirus crisis positions our economies. They're expecting a minus 3.8 decrease in the global Latin American economy, which is far below the global financial crisis and the Latin American debt that we had in the 80s, which was a huge systemic event. And then on the right, we have a little bit of the projections coming from the World Bank, which I find normally has a very good reading of our markets. And you see they're a little bit more aggressive as to what the impact of in the economy is going to be. And they're projecting a minus 4.6 contraction over the Latin American economies at the bottom. And in particular to Costa Rica, a minus 3.3. Now, the interesting factor here is that they are projecting a V-shaped recovery for our markets somewhat, and where Latin America is going to grow back next year 2.6%, which is still going to be below the value destruction that you're obviously seeing this year. And then Costa Rica is going to grow another 4.5%, which will bring us a little bit back from the crisis that COVID has generated and some more. Please proceed to the next slide. So how is this important, and how does it affect us? Well, when you see those economic shifts, you have to understand in real estate and in hospitality, the different impacts that this might have. And it has an impact on the clients, number one, the market, who's going to be able to come visit us, and who's going to have the purchasing power and the interest. And I think that it's very important to understand that those guys, like Barry just said, are going to be very, very hit probably for the next 12 months at least. The other things you need to understand is who else is going to have a hard time. So when you look at this particular slide, which is information from Moody's and S&P, you see in the high risk sectors some very important industries that are very, very, very crucial and very important for us, which is, for example, airlines. When you look at airlines, they're going to be hit very hard. We're going to be hit very hard in hospitality. So whenever the economy turns back, normally those industries in the green and yellow areas are going to turn back a lot quicker than the ones in red. So if we're in red and our adjacent industries or sectors are in the other blocks, that's good because they're going to help us pull forward. But when we have the situation we have where, airlift, which is fundamental for a hospitality project and for that matter, for any destination, when we see airlift being damaged equally or more so than we are, that's for the lack of a better word, scary. Okay. So just want to put that, into perspective that for us, we're seeing it from the hospitality glasses, from that eyes. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of other industries that are indispensable for our well-being that are also being hit. Okay, please continue to the next slide. So how is this relevant to Latin America, and what is the crisis doing specifically to hospitality? And this is all some great information from STR. This one's from April 21st, so a couple of days ago, was presented by Patricia Pu, and I recommend you guys visit their website and contact them for information on the market. They have a very clear reading. And what you see here is a map, or actually a graph, with the supply change and demand change in Latin America since 2012. And this puts into perspective where Q1 of 2020 positions us, okay? Please continue to the next block. From there, you also see this is a week-by-week analysis of what the different markets were, how they were behaving when they started declaring quarantine or when they started closing the economies and closing borders. So here what you see is the evolution week by week of some of these different markets. What is interesting here is that you see almost between 80 and 90% of the occupancy levels down, which means you're operating at below that 10% on average. And then you also see certain indications, not necessarily of recovery, but of higher occupancy, for example, in Peru, which are good insights. And one of the reasons why Peru is picking up is because they are using a lot of the rooms for quarantine, for specific COVID-related issues or counter issues in one way or another. So in that sense, Lima is having a lot of pickback, which is good, and that shows the effect of a good governmental policy and sectoral policy in that particular sense. Please continue. So here on the left, which is interesting, you see occupation as of March 2020. The interesting thing, which was quite a surprise for me, is that San Jose actually has the highest occupancy rate in all of Latin America for March, which is an interesting fact for our markets. But you also see that pretty much everywhere you're seeing occupancies below 30%. Why is this important? Because from an economic perspective, when you look at the structure of a hotel, normally the first 25 to 30% of the occupancy at a good rate, at a market ADR, it goes to cover operational expenses. Then the next 20%, give or take, which takes us to about a 50% occupancy, goes to pay back the banks. So those basically your financial costs. And then you only start making money until you're north of 55% occupancy. Now that structure is only valid if your ADR is a reasonable ADR, which means that you're not at 100% occupancy, giving $20 a night. You have to be at the right location within your ADR so that your economics can work. If you're able to do that, you should have anywhere between a 60 and 70% occupancy, and you'll be making, you'll have a projected IRR of anywhere between 10 and 15% after tax, and a yearly yield anywhere between 4 and 6%. So that's normally the typical hotel structure that we see. So when you look at these occupancy percentages, when you look at these occupations, what you understand is that people or the hotels are not going to be able to cover their costs, and they're not going to be able to pay the banks. And at this point today, it's one or the other. And what a lot of the hotels in the markets have done is they've closed or they've downsized, either by paying lower rates, 50% rates, 25% rates off of, sorry, not rates, salaries, by just closing all or partially, And that's the way they've been able to manage with these types of occupations, at least to survive for a short term. And I'll dive into short, mid, and long term a little bit further. Please continue to the next slide. So when you look at this final graph, what you see is the changes in ADR. And this is very important, and we're going to see it in the following slide, because what you can recover occupancy and you can start getting a lot of people through the door. But like I just mentioned before, if you don't get them at the right rate, then you're really not doing anything. You're doing a disservice, because everyone knows that a hotel at 100%, but at the negative rate with the variable costs, will only generate more losses than it would at 60%. Okay, so it is important here, and I would recall, and I would focus to San Jose, where if you look again at March, we only have a -1% in fall of ADR for March 2020, being also the best performer in terms of protecting the ADR. Now, pairs to pairs and apples to apples, obviously San Jose is a much smaller market than pretty much all of the other cities that are being compared in this particular graph. So that's important to understand. There's a lot less volume, but at the end of the day, part of our focus here is going to be Costa Rica, and it was important to understand the behavior of this particular market, which, by the way, San Jose is going to be mainly business travelers or short and overnight stays to come in and out of the country. Please continue to the next slide. So how's the sector going to recover, which is really the big question. How long is this going to take? What has happened in the past? You know, and for us, it's very important when we're understanding or when we're analyzing different opportunities, investment opportunities or turnaround opportunities, we need to understand the past in order to kind of estimate where we're going to go. So what do we see? What we see is we see pre-COVID prices and pre-COVID performance to understand that the hotel has the proper conditions. It's in the right ecosystem. It has the right operation. It has the right brand. It has the right type of structure. And it's just being hit hard by the COVID crisis. That's something that we need to know, because there's going to be a lot of underperformers that are obviously underperforming a lot more during this crisis, and we don't want to touch those because those are probably not going to recover. So it's important to understand where we're coming from. If you look at this first graph, this is also from STR, and what you see here is the evolution of the hospitality sector in the United States during two previous crises. The lighter blue is the crisis in September 11, which obviously had a much lower dip. It was pretty much only in the United States and for a short term of time that it really affected the market. But what's important here is that the occupation took about 18 months to recover, even in that particular scenario, which was not that deep for the rest of the world. When you look at the global financial crisis, which is the Lehman Brothers indicator that says 15 months, what you're seeing there is you're seeing a 15-month recovery with a lot deeper crisis, okay, with a lot deeper point. So occupation there has taken 18 and 15 months to recover. What's important is to understand the whole picture. When do we regain the condition we had before the crisis? And from there, you start growing. So this graph that you're seeing right now on the left lower corner, what you see is how the ADR fell. And you see in the September 11 crisis that it fell through 12 months. And then it started recuperating, but it took twice as long to recuperate the ADR than it did to recuperate occupancy. So that's important because we will get occupancy back, but it's going to take a while to stabilize the properties and stabilize the market, as you can see from that graph. If we see the next graph, what we will see is the global financial crisis. And here you'll see a 19-month crash of the ADR in the United States and a 37-month recovery. So again, we're looking at almost twice the time it took to come back in occupancy to come back in ADR. So what this slide says is it's going to take, in the US, particularly after the global financial crisis, it took almost 5 years to just get back to where they were when the financial crisis began. Please continue to the next slide. So what are we waiting for Costa Rica? And it's important that this is our analysis, and this is what we at Prime believe is going to be a relatively realistic scenario for the Costa Rican market. So what are we seeing here? The blue line is the World Bank's projections for Costa Rica's economy. And I just want to remember minus 4.6, minus 3.3 in 2020, plus 4.5 in 2021. Okay, so what's important here is how the economy is going to behave. So we see, again, that the lowest point is going to be probably towards the second semester of this year. And that's when the general economy is going to be at its worst in the next probably 60 to 120 days. We also see that they're projecting the economy is going to come back by 2021. So what that means is we'll be back somewhere relative to where we began this crisis. Again, if you remember the numbers, minus 3.3 plus 4.6, that gives us about 1.3 growth, which is not necessarily like that, but that'll give you some structural idea of the economic growth. Now, that does not mean that tourism is going to follow that, because we have cyclicity to take into account. So our market in Costa Rica and a lot of the Latin American markets, or at least in our region, and this will apply in different months of the year to different markets, but again, it's the example that really matters here. Costa Rica basically starts its high season in December, and it goes through Easter week. And that's our peak season, where we'll be more than 90% occupancy most of the time in most of the properties. From there, we have a drop in occupation, which picks up with a shoulder season in July for about 3 to 4 weeks, which is due to a dry spell during the rainy season that we have. And then we run into the lowest part of the year, which is normally September, October, which are the darkest parts of our cycle. And then we start picking back up again towards the end of November to run into the new high season. So what has happened in Costa Rica 2020? Basically, COVID stopped our high season in half. It broke it in half. The second part of our high season is non-existent. So March, April, we've been annihilated in terms of occupancy and tourism here. We still are not seeing any type of recovery. Borders are going to be closed till at least half of mid-May. So that pretty much leaves us with no high season at all. So what's happening in terms of the market itself? We're running into the low season. Most of the markets that feed us in terms of the US and Europe are probably going to be during July barely opening again from any type of quarantine or any type of restriction in terms of travel as well. So we don't see any type of pickup during those shoulder seasons that we normally get in July. We're going to run into the lowest part of our cycle again in August, September, October, so nothing's going to happen there. And we still don't think that in November and December we're going to be anywhere near where we were in terms of airlift, although there's a lot of intentions from different groups, as Barry also mentioned, to put Costa Rica at the top of the list. We still don't see that it's going to be available as it was before the crisis, so that we have a solid high season in 2021, 2022. What we really expect is to have a mid type of season during December 2021 and the first quarter of 2022. And we're only going to reach a certain level of normal when we start the high season at the end of 2021. So if you see the slide, you see a breaking point, which will come in the next 60 to 120 days. That's when we believe we're going to be in the darkest part of this crisis. Even in Costa Rica, we've had great performance in terms of COVID. We're one of the best countries in that particular sense, with one of the lowest mortality rates, if not the lowest in LATAM, one of the lowest in the world. And it's just been phenomenal what the government has done. But even with that, we're just not going to be back. Our economy is not going to be back. The banks, and I think the first part of this semester 1, 2020, has been a very humanistic approach to the situation. Let's understand what it is. Let's not hurt our creditors or hurt our providers or hurt anybody. Let's try to all survive together. But that's going to come to a hauling and screeching point in July and August, where everybody's going to have to start paying the bills. The market's not going to be back. The economy's not going to be there. The banks are going to have very little flexibility because of everything they've been doing over the last couple of months. And so I think that by the end of the year, we're going to have a situation exacerbated by that combination in the private sector, plus a lot less money coming into the government because of the lack of taxes generated this 2020. So we believe that second semester is going to be very hard. That's where a lot of the groups probably are not going to make it. Those that are not going to make it, that's probably when it's going to start to show. And then those that will are those that are able to restructure themselves, both from a financial perspective to a more permanent or mid-term solution with the banks and investors. Those that are going to be able to restructure their businesses in terms of hotels bringing in other types of revenue so that they can survive, and other strategies. And those are going to be the ones that are going to evolve into the new normal, which will, again, probably begin until the end of 2021. What do we need for this scenario to happen? It's important that we have the economic recovery that was projected. So yes, eventually 2021 hopefully will bring back some growth that'll let us pick up close to where we were before COVID. Return of airlift. So it's very important for us to be able to, as a country, to be able to position ourselves within the different airlines and within the different parts of the value chain to be able to be a priority and get that airlift back in place. In Costa Rica's case, we're going to need investment. Definitely, there's a new reality that our properties and our owners are going to have to deal with and prepare for, and that's where design and a lot of these strategies will come into place. And then there's incentives. Sadly, Costa Rica was already in one of its worst fiscal crises before COVID, so we're not going to have money to throw at the industry. What's going to allow us to come out will have to be some sort of incentive program that will allow corporate Costa Rica to start investing in the hospitality industry like it did back at the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s. So that's also very important. We're also going to have access to credit. There's going to be a lot of reshuffling of the equity stack in some of these products. And then obviously, very important, and going back to what Barry was saying, very good marketing for the country in terms of positioning our strength and being able to kind of cater to that global market that will be looking for a safe haven, nature-oriented democracy that did really well during COVID-19. Tom?
Yes.
Ready.
Very, very good. There's some behind the scenes, a couple questions that have come up. It's one that actually, when we spoke with you about this, I asked you your perception about the local tourism market. A lot of people in Costa Rica are going to want to travel. Your facts are, some of them are kind of sobering about what it would take to get them to open a hotel for locals. It's, the numbers are hard to add up, but there is certainly going to be some demand. So I'm just curious about that. Tied to that, there's some people talking about it in other markets, radical localism, they're calling it. People are going to want to travel potentially with their own food and even their own cleaning supplies and stay in residential properties, not to say Airbnb, but maybe villas and things like that. So a few observations like that, because in the initial, in the next 12 months to 18 months, getting international people here is going to be a tough one. So there's been some chats and thoughts in the background about that, but it also was something you and I spoke about earlier. So a few thoughts on that. Would be
Well,
good.
there's a couple of things on that, Tom, that are very important to pay attention to. Costa Rica particularly is going to be more hurt by the problem with the airlines than any other Latin America country, except for maybe the Caribbean, because we depend on the foreign tourist so much more than we do on the internal tourist. If my data is correct, in Mexico, it's about 65% internal tourism, in the US, about 70% internal tourism, and here in Costa Rica, it's way down by 20%. So even though Costa Ricans may decide not to travel and might then come into traveling within Costa Rica, I mean, not travel outside of the country, but travel within, let's say they come up to a 30% factor, we're still barely, as Christian pointed out, with a 25, 30% on a regular rate, we're just covering costs. So at 20, 30% occupation with a lower rate, which is what we're going to start off with, and with less consumption and less expenditures, it's going to be still a very, very hard struggle. But on top of that, the impact on our economy in general is going to be so big, because the sector of the economy that adds the greatest value to exports from Costa Rica is tourism. I mean, if you look at the high tech companies and the rest, they add 17% of what they sell stays in country as foreign exchange. But tourism is 70%. So when we generate $4,000 million in a year, 70% of that stays in Costa Rica. And that makes a very big difference to our economy. Now that we're going to be dropping down to let's say this year's average is probably going to be 1,000, 1,000 millions instead of 4,000 millions. We're going to have a lot less income, and it's going to be a lot less that stays in the country. So we have to look at local tourism is obviously got to be a priority. And in most of Latin America, it's going to be able to help an awful lot, because they have enough volume within their own countries to be able to generate at least the cost structure and to keep people alive and keep the hotels alive and keep the different activities and entertainments alive, so that when the foreign tourists come, they're there. Because if we don't have that, we lose a lot of tourism as well. So it's very important that the government strategize in helping all these small companies stay alive. Costa Rica, over 90% of the companies in Costa Rica are small and very small companies, and we need to keep them alive just to be able to keep the experience alive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would add to that a couple of things, and we've been addressing that question a lot. We created a company, a vehicle called Creo Capital, which is basically focusing on hospitality opportunistic investments. So we're looking at buying hotels. We're looking at taking advantage in the good sense, protecting jobs. Trying to allow the least number of hotels to go under. Before they go under, we're trying to come in, buy them, and give them some continuation, and obviously have a good profit out of that. So that's our main question. Are we going to buy a hotel that we're just not going to be able to fill or sustain in any single way over the next 12 months, like you mentioned? So I think that there's a couple of things that Barry mentioned that are important. The Costa Rican government is now moving all of its holidays for Friday, which is something that they stopped doing a couple of years ago. That's going to incentivize the local tourism, which was not being incentivized because it was putting all the holidays within the weekends, et cetera, or in the middle of the week. So now I think that's going to help a little bit. The situation is consumption. At the end of the day, again, Costa Rica was being hit by a very hard fiscal crisis that was affecting our economy. The purchasing power was still there, but highly indebted. So at this time, like Barry said, a lot of the people would travel internally at much lower rates, and that might be the solution. I mean, yeah, it's true that 25-30% cover costs, another 20% covers financial costs as well. So that's under normal conditions. Today, if we're operating at half of the people, if we're operating at a lower, gladly interest rates are very low globally, and the same applies to Costa Rica. So that structure is being improved. That's part of the squeeze that I was mentioning in the restructuring part that needs to happen. We need to be astute in how we negotiate our cost structure so that we're able to manage with 35% and survive. So I think that that's one thing. The other thing is that when you talk about regional, there's a different approach to regional or local, because at the end of the day, if you look at Central America, for example, all of Central America is like Colombia. So we're similar in people, we're similar in population, we're similar from a structural perspective. Colombia has different cities: Medellin, Bogotá, Barranquilla, Santa Marta, Cartagena. These are all separate economies within one country, in one context. The same thing is similar in Central America. They do have a higher GDP than we do as a whole, but when we look at that, there's an opportunity there. There's an opportunity in understanding, okay, I usually sell to my top client, which is the US market, the European market. They're the top dollar. But I need to understand that I can still sell locally, which is going to be cheaper for some of the other members of the Central American area to come to Costa Rica. We also have Panama. Panama has greater connectivity. How do we create a stronger relationship with Tocumen to be able to bring more passengers coming through from Panama? That's a key relationship for us. Colombia is a key relationship for us. So at the end of the day, we need to find how to grow from just the Costa Rican market to a shorter regional market with a global perspective in the long term. So we need to build, but what we are seeing is let's build solutions today that will help us stay alive. And in some cases, hotels will remain shut until November of this year. That's the reality in a lot of the cases. But if we can, let's try to have some structural changes. What are those structural changes that will allow us in the short term to survive? Okay, let's think of residential components. And the residential component does not depend on the kind of, on the daily sales of the different nights. You can build the residential component, you can sell it, that has a positive cash flow in a much shorter term. So that is something that architects should be looking at. How can I take a hotel and find other ways of revenue for that hotel to be able to survive? And that's one. Residential to the international market, there's a lot of interest. You mentioned it a little bit, extreme localism, but there's also that huge movement of how do I get to a safe place for a pandemic, kind of like the one we're living. So in the Caribbean right now, we're seeing a huge pickup in the high-end residential market. Anything above 2 million, 3 million is getting sold very, very easily, very quickly, because a lot of the wealthy North Americans are seeing that as a safe haven. Well, Costa Rica gladly is also positioned as that type of market, being the natural successor to Cabo San Lucas, for example.
We're seeing that in several projects that won't be done for the next three plus years, that they're looking at the residential in a new way. I want to jump. We've got a few more minutes. You've received in your email inboxes the kind of questions we're getting on the chat. If you've got a minute, and if we'll go to the last slide here, but if you look through, there's some tough ones. The one, what happens if we do get a vaccine? That could change everything. Obviously, we all are hopeful for that. But hopefully it speeds up the recoveries that you talked about, but there are some sobering facts there. How long did it take for tourism to recover from 2008? I think you just showed us it was 12 months for the decline and 24 months to recover. But those facts from STR you said, and we can send a link out.
19 months and 37 months. So it's almost 5 years.
So it was the second number, 19 and 37 months. Sorry. That was answer from Rena Shaw. Read through your emails if you got them. Esteban, there's already a framework to show the commercial value of authentic and memorable experiences. The question is how to expand this consideration outside of the luxury and ecotourism realms, because maybe some of the big players will succeed more quickly, but how does that filter down into some of the smaller things? I think, Barry, you touched on that. So,
well, there's an interesting question in there, Tom, that says most of our developments are not the high-end luxury hotels. So what do the lower echelon hotels do to reactivate within this period? And I think this is a very interesting question, because it's going to be key is the marketing structure and the marketing strategy that we use towards the future. The first thing, though, is to reiterate what I said before, is that it doesn't necessarily have to be luxury if you have a luxurious experience in terms of the quality of the experience. That, in effect, will bring people to you. But then the key to that is how do you get your potential client to see that that's available? So the interconnection between people here in Costa Rica and groups of similar interest outside of Costa Rica will play an important role in being able to market and bring people to these properties. And I'm talking about musicians, I'm talking about artists, I'm talking about different segments of our communities that can bring together people who have similar interests but would like to see what it's like in Costa Rica. And so you can bring them to these hotels and the rest.
No, and it's funny that questions. Jose Gutierrez said something very similar twice in a different way. So there are you've touched on something very important here. Look, we're at the end of our hour. I'm going to jump in and say thank you. We can keep talking now. Some people are welcome. Anyone's welcome to stay, but we'll wrap up probably in the next 5 or 10 minutes. On the screen, a little bit of we'll send out the recording of this to anyone who's interested, at least a link to it. If you want to learn more about some of the other topics that we believe are important as a company, Gensler, in both the hospitality and other practice areas, the QR code's there, www.gensler.com for sure. Barry and Christian, you get 15 seconds each to give us your final kind of what you want us to take away. I don't want to be that pushy, but we're aware of everyone's time on the call. So
Well,
Christian, over to you.
I'll take it first since I'm the older. So
Okay, you very good.
no, basically, thank you for your interest and for everybody who's watching us and participating, because that shows a very important factor, which is that we really have to look at this challenge that this coronavirus crisis is generating for us and be willing to diagnose, to investigate beforehand, and take on the challenge of thinking differently, of thinking in a regenerative form, that we can reinvent ourselves and recreate and make things happen that haven't happened in the past, that haven't taken into account the more needy people and the outskirts of our basic economic structure, so that they can be included properly in their aspirations and in their wellness as well. Thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I want to also thank you for listening and engaging. And again, to Gensler for the invitation. And I just want to close by saying, that there's definitely a lot of opportunity in the midst of this crisis. There's a lot of hard times. There's a lot of hard work, but it's a once in a lifetime opportunity. We are seeing that in the market. We are seeing that in people's intentions. And, I just encourage you to really make the most out of this opportunity.
Very good. Thank you. And watch this space. I mean, we're all in this together. If more of us succeed, the better everyone's going to be. And I really appreciate Barry and you putting it in perspective for us. And the kind of questions that came back, just what we were looking. I think we've hit some chords that are very strong. So thank you again, and we'll sign off now. I appreciate it. David and/or Rebecca, the people in the background, thank you so much for making this happen. We're all living in a virtual world, and these are going to be the kind of ways we interact, and we're trying to get better at this as well. But Rebecca or David, anything else you are hearing or that we've missed, or feel free to tell us it's over and we'll log off. Rebecca, are we okay?
Hi guys, it's David here. Yeah, I think we are okay with everything. So
Okay.
Thank you so much to everybody.
Okay, very good. And thank you so much, everyone. Watch this space. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.